Qatar is ready for football's biggest showcase, the FIFA World Cup, but the lead-up has been controversial. Critics are accused of double standards. So how could this event change Qatar and the Middle East? This is Inside Story. Hello, I'm Sohail Rahman and welcome to this special edition of Inside Story. Qatar has waited 12 years for this moment and it's finally here. The 2022 FIFA World Cup is about to begin. Football's greatest sporting prize will be contested here in the Middle East for the very first time. And over the next month, it's expected that over 1 million football fans will descend on Doha. Qatar! Since winning the bid in 2010, Qatar has spent billions of dollars to prepare. The country has built new roads and infrastructure, a new airport and a new metro system linking new stadiums, some of them modern and innovative, others inspired by the region's history and traditions. But the lead-up has put Qatar under international scrutiny like never before, especially on human rights issues and the treatment of migrant workers. So we'll take a look at the impact of the World Cup on and off the pitch and how it'll change Qatar and the region long after the final whistle. Here at Al Jazeera, our journalists are working hard to provide a unique perspective on the world's biggest sporting event. We'll have special coverage throughout the whole of the tournament.
So I think what's really exciting to be here as a journalist covering the tournament is the fact that this is a compact World Cup, the most compact in history. So I can be reporting on a game early afternoon for Al Jazeera, and then that night as a fan I can go and watch a game. And for me that's what's really exciting. And in terms of Al Jazeera's coverage as a whole, I think one of the advantages for us is we are a channel based here in Doha, so we have presenters, reporters, correspondents that have lived in the region for many years and they have that insider knowledge which other broadcasters may not have.
It's been on our radar for the last 12 years really, since they were awarded the competition in 2010. The advantage of Al Jazeera obviously is that it's on our home turf, but Al Jazeera's general advantage over other broadcasters is its global reach. So we've obviously got things covered here in Qatar, but we've got so many correspondents all over the world, whether it be South America, North America, Europe, Africa. We've engaged our correspondents in all of those areas as well to make this a really global coverage of this tournament, which is here on our doorstep.
Well, because we live here, we've got contacts across its diverse population, so we'll be able to tell you the stories you won't hear anywhere else.
Let's bring in our guests for today's edition of Inside Story. Joining me now is Ross Griffin, Middle East editor for the International Journal of the History of Sports, and Faisal al-Mudahka, editor-in-chief of the Gulf Times. And from along in Cameroon, Chansiline Nanze, a sports reporter at Cameroon Radio and Television. Welcome to all of my guests here on this edition of Inside Story. But first, let's speak to Khalifa Haroon. He's the founder of iloveqatar.net that provides information about events in Qatar. Good to have you on the programme. Good to have you with us on the programme. Gianni Infantino said just a short while ago on the eve of the event, "Today I feel Qatari, today I feel Arab, today I feel African, today I feel gay, today I feel disabled, today I feel like a migrant worker." One gets the impression that Infantino is saying that we should all be proud of who we are and what we've achieved in bringing the World Cup to the Middle East, despite the issues and the problems that Qatar has experienced from the global community.
Absolutely, and I think the message is very clear. The message is that we are all unique, and it's football that's supposed to be bringing us together so that we can not only share in each other's uniqueness, but also share each other's culture with each other and learn from each other too. And I think it's a responsibility of every individual to care about their neighbor. And I'm looking forward to seeing all of the amazing people from around the world and all of their different backgrounds coming over and having a great time.
It's a very friendly message that you're portraying, but it hasn't been an easy message for Qatar or the Arab world to get out these past few years. Within the last decade or so, we've seen the Arab Spring arise across the Middle East, creating turmoil for the region. Also, Qatar itself, a victim of a blockade, an illegal blockade that was lifted. It lasted nearly 4 years. The outside world looking at the Middle East thinking, is this really the right place to host you know, such a huge event. I mean, it's been a hard messaging campaign as well.
Well, I mean, if we look at history, we look all over the world, we'll see that some countries have had hundreds, if not thousands of years to go through a lot of turmoil and trouble and problems, and are still going through problems, you know, today. And here in the Middle East, I think there's no doubt that anybody could say, you know, that the people here haven't been suffering. You know, there's been a lot of suffering in the region. And one of the really amazing things about us having the opportunity to host the World Cup is that at least for a moment, we can all, first of all, showcase what we really stand for, who we really are, and forget about all of the troubles and the problems that we've been facing over the past 10, 20, you know, 30 years. And so I think the message, you know, that we want to share is that, listen, it's time for us to have a chance. And again, it's the World Cup. That means that it's a chance and an opportunity for everyone from all over the world, from any country, to one day host the World Cup. And I think that's the dream, right? That as an individual, you might be playing football outside, you know, just right in front of your house, thinking that one day I'm going to be part of a club and then a national team, and I'm going to represent my country, maybe in the World Cup. And similarly, countries also have the ambition that maybe one day I also have the opportunity to host the great game too.
And indeed,
So
if I just jump in
suffering.
there very quickly, because, you know, the optimism is great, but at the end of the day, Qatar in itself in these past 10 years has received a great deal of criticism over various issues. I just wondered what your take was on it, considering you are so active on various social platforms and you do promote Qatar, what sort of either abuse you've had or you've read abuse that you've been upset about.
So, I mean, first of all, let me start off with the fact that hosting the World Cup is an event that we all know that every single spotlight, every single magnifying glass is going to be on the country. This is known from day one. And the way that I see it, this is a great opportunity so that we can hear from experts from around the world to tell us, hey, maybe there are a couple of issues here and there. I mean, maybe there are many issues as well, and gives us an opportunity to fix them. I feel like when it comes to criticism, of course, there are some valid criticism. There is sadly criticism based off of misinformation, you know, that's out there. And I feel like there's no acknowledgement of all of the positive change that's happened in the country. So I definitely feel I feel a bit emotional in the sense that so many people, myself included, have really been working hard to make Qatar and the world a better place. But it seems like that's just dismissed, and we're only focusing on problem after problem after problem, even problems that have already been solved many years ago.
Okay.
So again, I just hope that people can give us a chance and encourage positive change instead of constantly beating us down. And again, I've seen a lot of positive messages, you know, on social media as well. People from all over the world supporting Qatar, backing us, and saying that, you know, they stand for what we're doing. And I've even seen some people saying, listen, good job, Qatar, with some of the changes that you've done. Now we expect more from you. And honestly, we all expect more. As a Qatari, I expect the best out of my country because Qatar deserves the best. That's a message that you see displayed all over the nation. And we want to show the world that we are a major force for good.
Well, we shall see what the world does make of it during and certainly after the World Cup. For the moment, Khalifa Al-Haroon, thanks so much for joining us from Doha.
Thank you so much.
So let's start with our conversation. Faisal, can I come to you first? I mean, it's a moment to be proud of, surely, but did you ever think, just briefly, that this moment would actually arrive here in Qatar right now?
Well, you know, it's a lot of dedication, a lot of, you know, milestones and stages that it's not only about the World Cup, it's our social development since that time. You know, it's been now 12 years. We have progress in everywhere. In our social development, on the sport infrastructure, and I mean, it's been it's like a dream come true.
Indeed, and that's what we were talking about just earlier before we came on air. I mean, Ross, can I just come to you about this? I mean, a new chapter is about to be written in the FIFA history books here. So when the referee blows that whistle on the opening match in rarely less than 24 hours' time for the start of the 2022 FIFA World Cup, How much of this chapter is going to be about football, and how much of this chapter will be about the criticism that Qatar has received and had to endure as well in the lead up to this event?
Well, a chapter is a very interesting metaphor to use, because looking at it in terms of the history of the World Cup itself, it's being brought into a new place. As we all know, the World Cup has never been hosted by a Middle Eastern country before. So that's a brand new chapter in FIFA's history of the World Cup. It will also bring a new chapter into Qatar's sporting history. And this is a misconception. And one of the main criticisms that it faced for the longest time was that Qatar never had a sporting culture. It was almost as if the World Cup was the beginning of football in this country, and that's patently false. They've been playing football here since the late 1940s. And amidst all the criticisms that they've had to face, this has been one of the biggest misconceptions often lobbied against Qatar by Western journalists with little knowledge of the game beyond a very Eurocentric scope that includes the top 5 or 6 leagues in Europe and the Champions League. They don't recognize that this sport is indeed a global game. So when we see the World Cup beginning in less than 24 hours' time, it's a new chapter in Qatar's football history and its football culture, but it's not the first chapter. That chapter began in 1947. That book began, in 1947, and it's one that will be continue to be written after this tournament is finished. We've got the Asian Cup in 12 months' time again.
Ross, just hold that thought for a moment, because workers' rights have been under scrutiny in Qatar since it won the right to host the World Cup in 2010. Now, the International Labour Organization, part of the UN, says working and living conditions of hundreds of migrant workers have greatly improved in the past decade. Yet Qatari officials say the country is still coming under criticism and much is misdirected.
Someone talks about 6,500 victims, another says 10,000, and a third one talks about 15,000, as if there was a competition. There shouldn't be any politicizing or using misinformation, so we ask that you refer to official sources like ILO.
Faisal, can I come to you? I mean, obviously, the government officials at very high levels are making it aware to the international community, both media and politicians, as well as the public at large, that some of the criticism is incredibly unfair, despite the fact that there are other countries in the world that also have human rights issues, inverted commas, in their own nations. I mean, how disappointed are you at the way criticism has been directed at Qatar, especially tagged together with the World Cup?
Sure. So, if we go back a little to the history, our independency was in 1971. So we have certain policy that does not fit now. So now we have the World Cup. Our population since that time have doubled. You're talking about 12 years of reform of policy. And I really also think that the reform of policies is done because of the World Cup, but it was fast forward. And I think after the World Cup, it will also continue based on the need and to meet the international law. So, Sohail, we are really in a hypocrisy world. Today, you listen to Twitter firing 50% of his employee. Nobody talks. Today, for example, international companies like Nike is being abused in Asia for child laboring. So the criticism goes to Nike itself, does not go to the country. So if you think of Qatar, from the 8 stadium, 7 stadium was built by international respected company that has HEC, which is health, safety, environment measurement, internationally recognized. So where are they? Those companies are they in the spot? No, they cashed out and left. 4 of the metros has been built by international companies. Where are they? So really, I think this is really unfair because Qatar during this time have reformed many. One is the security funds. Second is the minimum wages. Even the accommodation, it's really for Qatar for the policy and enforcement, but it is part of those international companies who wanted to save some money somewhere.
Should have looked after the workers themselves. I mean, that's a debate we'll carry on with in a moment.
Sure.
Let's bring in Chansiline Nanze there in Melong in Cameroon, just to change the tone slightly for us to understand the context of where we are in terms of the World Cup. I mean, Chansiline, when South Africa, for example, won the rights to host the 2010 tournament, were you, as a Cameroonian, as proud to see the event come on your continent, even though it wasn't in your country?
Of course, we have this notion in Africa that once a country is participating in the World Cup, it is the entire Africa that is participating in the World Cup. And so when the competition came to South Africa in 2010, it was this feeling of being African. All Africans were proud because before the competition actually kicked off, no one believed that an African country could single-handedly host the World Cup. South Africa did that in 2010 to maybe the surprise of many who had already ruled South Africa out and who had brought in their criticisms, questioning why the competition should be given to South Africa to host. So it was kind of this African spirit that once it concerns one person in Africa, it concerns the entire Africa.
Indeed, I mean, so right now you can understand perhaps what Qatar is experiencing to a certain point of view. Where you are, what are people saying about the World Cup in Qatar? Are they talking about human rights? Are they talking about migrant worker rights? Are they talking even about gay and lesbian LGBTQ issues? What's the conversation right now in Cameroon?
Well, the conversation in Cameroon right now is about the competition proper. Cameroonians, I would want to say, are football-loving people. Anything that has to do with football, you'll find a Cameroonian interested in that. And we've had to talk with some people on the street here in Cameroon, and they've actually been hailing Qatar because no one, I want to say, believed that Qatar, that is believed to be a small country with a population that is minimal. We're talking about 3 million people, if I am not mistaken. No one believed that Qatar could do that, given that one, we talked about the climatic conditions that are not favorable. They equally talked about the surface area that might not be able to host the number of people that are coming into the country. We're talking about millions of people that should be getting into the country for the competition. But then we've seen the strides that have been made by the country. We've seen the state-of-the-art stadia that have been constructed in the country. We've also seen the mobile hotels that have been brought in. And Cameroonians, I would say, they appreciate what Qatar has done to ensure that people feel comfortable when the competition kickstarts.
OK, well, we'll come back to you about that, because obviously lots of issues being raised, and even, I say, 24 hours before the ball is kicked, FIFA's president himself has criticised some of that media coverage ahead of the World Cup, saying that Europe shouldn't be giving what he called moral lessons on human rights.
I think for what we Europeans have been doing in the last 3,000 years around the world, we should be apologizing for the next 3,000 years before starting to give moral lessons to people. This doesn't mean that we shouldn't point at what doesn't work. Here in Qatar as well. Of course, there are still things that don't work and that need to be addressed. But this moral lesson giving, one-sided, it's just hypocrisy.
So Faisal, Gianni Infantino obviously making his mark on the eve of the World Cup itself. What's your reaction to what he said? Is it too late?
I don't think it's too late. This stereotype of the Arabs, the Middle East, I agree on what he says on lecturing us on human rights and everything. To tell you the truth, I think countries like, who's criticizing us, Germany or England or whatever, should use this opportunity for a public diplomacy. To, maybe we forgive them. I mean, the public, it's not me, the public of the Middle East, forgive them for what they have done to Iraq or whatever. And the whole idea of the World Cup is a hub of alliance of civilization. We sit here, we talk, we know each other. But lecturing us from London, whatever, does not really send a good message for the youth. Or does not start a new page.
Ross, what do you make of it? Because obviously, rebuking countries, sort of merges into the domain of politics, doesn't it? And you expect politicians to be saying these sorts of things, you know, human rights activists, whatever. Gianni Infantino is head of a sports body. He has a very fine line to walk.
Yeah, ironically enough, I don't think his rhetoric helps. I think something like that just reaffirms this us versus them dynamic that existed once in colonial times, and it still lingers on. I think that there could be, it's very combative, and you catch more flies with honey than you do with vinegar, I think. He's making some valid points, but I don't think his tone is going to recognise the culture of change that has come into Qatar because of the World Cup. Massive changes and massive improvements have been made in the last 10 to 12 years. And ILO have recognised this, Amnesty have recognised this, people like Nicholas McGeehan in Fair Square have recognised this. But the debate, I think, isn't about change, it's about the rate of change. And when you have this kind of rhetoric, again, exacerbating this divide of us versus them, it doesn't help things. If anything, it just it widens that distance even further.
And the rate of change, gentlemen, and Chansiline, we'll come back to that in a moment, because the rate of change has also created the debate over the number of deaths related to World Cup projects and the misconception about the number of people who have died because of World Cup related projects. Lots of numbers have been bandied around globally, but we go by what the International Labour Organization has said and the myths that they want to dispel. They are a UN body. This is what they had to say.
This relates to the total number of South Asian nationals who have died in Qatar over a 10-year period. It doesn't make any distinction between whether these are work-related deaths or non-work-related deaths. In Qatar, the workforce is incredibly diverse. South Asians are working in every sector of the economy across all income levels, and they make up a huge proportion of the overall population, 50 to 60% of the population. The figure of 6,500 is certainly misleading.
Such huge development, Faisal, comes with a price. One death is one death too many for any country in projects like this. But Qatar has actually, as you say, the policy is there from the government. It's the implementation of the companies to make sure that safety is observed. How quickly has Qatar, do you think, had to change to, you might say, come up to the standards of what the international community expect when you put on big events like this?
First of all, you know, back to the statistic, I mean, he have spoke about it very well. You know, a lot of people that doesn't know that the demography of Qatar. Qatar has 85% of expats, 15% of locals. So manipulating the statistic, this is what was going on. Another thing, you know, you have, I think in this case, you have two paths. One is the propaganda, which we really cannot help, and the complex of the white savior complex that we cannot help. Secondly, we have people who are misinformed. So those, I think that's really is our duty to correct that misconception. In terms of policies, I mean, there is the minimum wage was not there. The kafala was not there. Kafala, which, you know, you have somebody in contract and he cannot free move from one place to one place. Second, the third, the most important thing, which a lot of people didn't talk about. As I mentioned, 85%, you have 69 billion Qatari riyal has to transfer to South of Asia because of the people works here. So how many jobs does create?
Ross, can I just bring you in on here? Because obviously, you know, the history of how Qatar's dealt with the World Cup will perhaps be left to the historians after the event is over. But for the moment, in terms of like things like policy, employment policy, workers' rights, I mean, how important is it that Qatar, you might say, learns from what it's experiencing right now for when it wants to bid for other events in the future?
That's a very good question. Qatar's sporting journey isn't going to finish with the World Cup. So we've got the Asian Cup in 12 months' time, the Asian Games in 2030, and there's always the potential of an Olympic bid bubbling under the surface. I think Qatar as a state is learning every day about how to host a mega event of this significance. If you asked them 10 years ago, 12 years ago, what would you do differently? I think the big learning moment they have, big takeaway they would have is they'd control the narrative a lot more closely, a lot firmly. For the longest time, they let Western journalists, particularly in Western Europe, have a free rein over how to describe the tournament. It's only in the last year or two that they've actually started to answer back. I think that's the big takeaway that they'll take away from this tournament.
Let's see what the takeaways are once the tournament begins. And then sadly, we have to leave it there. I'm sure this debate could have gone on for another hour or so. There's so much more to discuss, and we will come back to it, I'm sure, in the month of the World Cup. For the moment, I'd like to thank Ross Griffin, Faisal, al-Mudahka and Chansiline Nanze in Melong in Cameroon. Good luck to your team as well, Nancy. I know that you would want them there, Chansiline, in the semi-finals, I'm sure. And thank you again for joining us on Inside Story. Thank you as well for watching. You can see this programme again anytime by visiting our website at aljazeera.com. And for further discussion, go to our Facebook page. That's facebook.com/AJ Inside Story. You can also join the conversation on Twitter. We're at AJ Inside Story. And don't forget to tune in to Al Jazeera over the next month for extensive coverage of the World Cup. From me, Sohail, Rahman and the Inside Story team. Thanks for your time and your company.